Welcome to Reflections, the podcast that biblically encourages, equips, and empowers women for apostolic life and service. Here's your host, Dr. Cindy Miller.
Welcome, everyone, to Let's Talk. I am very excited about this episode. It's part 2 of the Women Who Write series. And last month, we talked about the process of learning to write. And in this episode, we're going to talk about the diverse world of writing and the various avenues available for publishing. So it's going to be an exciting time. We have Leanne Alexander here with us, and she is Associate Editor-in-Chief of the UPCI, Senior Vice President of Pentecostal Resources Group. She's authored 4 books, 4 very good books. She's the host of the Wholyness Podcast, an ordained minister of the UPCI, and serves as discipleship director for her local church, The Sanctuary. And I'm so glad you're here for part 2.
Thank you.
Absolutely delighted. It was so good in part 1. I know it's going to be just as good. I'm Cindy Miller, and I'm your host for Let's Talk. And this podcast is produced by Reflections Magazine. So we have a lot of territory to cover today. And so I'm going to just let you kind of get into this whole idea. We talked about process and finding your voice and knowing your audience and just get started writing. That was in our last episode. And so now I'd really like for you to start talking to us about writing for publication.
Sure.
So tell us, what would that look like? How is that different from just learning the process? And now that I've kind of developed, I know I've got to go to the grocery store to think through and plan, and I've got to find that quiet spot to write, and then I have to, fall out of love with my words and let it be edited. Now that I know that, What happens now?
Well, that is the fun part for some people. For some part, it's a scary part for some people. But finding an outlet so that this labor of love I've created can get out to the masses. Mm-hmm. So that I think can be very exciting. But I know for many people, it's a bit overwhelming because where do I go next? So I want to stress to begin with that there are so many different avenues. I think we probably referenced last conversation that sometimes we think of writing, we immediately think book. But I want to start by just saying that not everything should be a book necessarily. Right. Sometimes we need to think about writing for an online world. My goodness, couldn't social media be all the better for having people who were thoughtful and really put some thought into the way they created an online presence that was thoughtful and well-written and prayerfully researched. So anyway, that's another topic, another episode. And edited, my goodness, it's beautiful. But I do think we probably need to think about, we've got this emerging world of social media and digital platforms and all these presences for communication. And so when we start having a conversation about women who write, I think there needs to be some intentionality about some crossover there. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it may be that there are some ladies who say, for my church, for my district, for my something, I think the best format for us to share the kind of message that the Lord is putting on our hearts might actually be in an online presence. Maybe someone creates a social media platform for specific ministry, and they're very intentional about writing and releasing information there. So I think we can start by acknowledging some platforms like that, podcasts like this that are so beneficial to people that it requires work and planning and writing for podcasts. So I think we start by acknowledging all of these kinds of platforms that maybe a few generations ago we didn't have, but that we, in the same way, we need to think about all those things we talked about last conversation about writing. Let's apply those disciplines to the emerging digital platforms that are available. I think of that as publishing and an outlet for writing as well.
Absolutely.
So I think that's important. But then obviously there are those listeners and viewers today who say, yes, but I am writing a book. So we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about shorter things than full-length books. I think I've said in our last conversation, it's a lot of work to just start out with, I'm going to write a book. Well, for many publishers, if you don't have 40 or 50,000 words of content, they're not prepared to look at that because that's what they think is kind of the minimum standard for a full-length book. And my experience has been, I don't know, something about the 70-page mark. I don't know if it's for me personally, just like this mental barrier, but many people can write for 40, 50, 60 pages, right? Many of us, if we're passionate about something, I can do 40 pages on just my favorite kind of ice cream, right? But to really commit to a full book, 40, 50,000 words, that's a lot.
You better love your topic.
You better love it. You better be committed. You've thought about it in multiple ways. So I say that to not intimidate people, but to say a good question to ask is this a full book? Or am I committing to, this is a book, we're going to publish it the whole 9 yards? Or does it look a little differently? Is it maybe a series of blogs? Mm-hmm. So one of the words, I mentioned podcasts, I mentioned social media. Blogs are an important platform for publishing. And it's cool because I think we're in a second wave of blogs. I remember, I don't think I said this in our conversation last episode, but part of my story, now that I think about it, probably the way I got discovered, that's a silly word, but you know what I'm saying, was because I'm in college, I'm interested in writing, that's where the direction I'm moving. Somebody connected to me and said, hey, would you consider writing some Sunday school lessons? Oh. And then I started that. And they said, hey, we've got this blog that we're doing. Would you consider being part of the blog? And long story short, somebody saw a blog and they said, hey, and I end up in St. Louis through a blog, writing for a blog. So let's think about blogs too. But anyway, back to the books. We do want to think about what's the right avenue for this message that I feel so impassioned about. And sometimes that's books, sometimes that might look like other venues. But for books, I do want to take some time to talk about books because that is important. If we did this cool little Pentecostal history loop, a big part of the reason that the UPCI, we have some of the identity that we have is because very, very early on, we could probably argue that Pentecostal Publishing House slightly predates the UPCI because there was a history of some of the organizations working in publishing even pre-merger because we recognize the importance of creating resources to get out to people to help spread the gospel message. So it is important that we're writing and creating new books. And that may go various directions. So there's certainly self-publishing as an option. There's publishing through Pentecostal Resources Group and Pentecostal Publishing House. Maybe it's helpful if I kind of say, I just threw both of those terms out. Maybe I'll kind of explain that. So the UPCI's official publishing arm is the Pentecostal Resources Group, which is an umbrella term which encapsulates Pentecostal Publishing House. That's where most people, if they see a table of books at a conference, that's Pentecostal Publishing House. That's part of Pentecostal Resources Group, as is Ministry Central, and some of these other resource projects that we have connected. But many people are thinking about writing a book, and they say, well, I don't know, what do I do about, getting a cover, and what do I do about, getting it, I want it to show up, on the website, I want it to go to different events, what does that look like? So maybe I'll just share a little bit about... Yeah, if you say, well, I'm interested in some help with that process, there really are two paths. I'll talk about self-publishing in a moment. One path is to see if it's a right fit for Pentecostal Publishing House. I'll just say Pentecostal Publishing House because I think we're familiar with that term.
Everybody knows it.
Yeah, they're kind of familiar with that. So we do select a number of manuscripts every year to commit to publishing, work with that author and help them through the processes I just described. And we can't publish everything that we take in, but we evaluate, okay, what are the kinds of things we're hearing from readers out there saying, hey, I wish we had a book on family, parenting. I wish we had a book for pastors on this certain aspect. All kinds of different things we hear all the time. And so we've got a committee that's coming together multiple times in a year and saying, okay, what have people sent us? And does that gel with the things that we're hearing that people need? And so then from there, we've got a team of professionals that work with that author to help take that manuscript and that idea and just collaborate through that whole process until that book is out and it's traveling around to the different events during the year, and it's on the website, and we're helping get people aware of this new resource. So that's an exciting process, and I think we've already talked a lot about the things that make a book successful in working through that process with the committee by really editing that book. And so that author knows when they turn in, this is ready.
It's best quality.
It's at its best. Now, we're still going to put it through some stages of editing.
Still going to hurt your feelings by cutting a few words.
We're going to do it. But you've already taken care of it as best you can. And so then the editing team can come along. They can strengthen it even further with yet another fresh set of eyes. And then the marketing team working together with designers to say, hey, what kind of cover will make this jump out at that event so nobody misses your book, and they get to really
so there's just a lot of support, a lot of support all around.
Yeah, help creating the right kind of cover. Work with the author. What ideas do you have? Work with our whole marketing team to say what's the right look and feel based on the message that the author is wanting to communicate, and then getting through the printing process and all the details that go into saying what makes this book attractive and appealing, and then releasing it and using all kinds of digital ways to promote it and draw attention to it. So that's a
as well as traveling.
Absolutely, making sure it gets out on the road and gets to different districts and areas of the country, and on the website so it can be seen really anywhere. So that's what it looks like to go through PPH. Now, there are authors who say, I don't think that's the right path for my book, and we certainly understand that. At the same time, as I said, there are books that come to PPH that we say, I don't think this is the right fit for PPH. So it's certainly a situation where each book has its own path and what's best for it. So we understand that. We should probably talk then for those who say, I think I really want to take care of the process myself. And so we would call that self-publishing. And I think that conversation looks so differently than it did 20 years ago because of how technology has emerged.
It's so different, because when I started writing, you found a traditional publishing house. That's how long ago it's been. And then watching the change over these years to, it's just so different. But
really
you talk about it.
Really
You're the expert.
Well, no, you're absolutely right. And, so I'll just name names. So even with Amazon, they can walk you through all kinds of steps. And again, there are times where an author just immediately feels that's the best step. We love for authors to give us a chance at PPH to take a look, but sometimes authors just know this is the way I want to go. And then there are times where we say, this doesn't fit for us. And we will say, Amazon can walk you through a lot of similar steps. A lot of what I just said with PPH, you're going to get, but the process would be that you're making those decisions somewhat solo, but you can obviously get ideas from friends and family who say, ooh, I like this cover, and all that. But the steps of editing that book to make sure it's as strong as it can be, working with a designer to say, I want a cover that's really engaging, and even the inside layout of the book, that I'll just say a red flag for us sometimes and I'll talk in just a minute about even if you do self-publish, getting PPH to work with your book. We can share that option as well. But if the book is like, 24 font and it's like, triple space, and it's, or the reverse where it's tiny, tiny font and it's squeezed on a page. We simply want to make sure that the inside of the book, as well as the cover, is very accessible, very easy to read. So that's something that you want to think about in that layout process. And then once the book is printed, all of the steps that even in a PPH scenario, we still absolutely want that author to be passionate about the book and promote it and let people know about it. And so either way, this is one of those things that I think is really, it's something I've personally had to like, I don't know if reconcile, that might be too strong a word, but to really get my head around. because writing, like we talked about last conversation, in many ways, it's a solitary act.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so I talked about, I got this little tiny room in my house that I've made like this storyboard room that just looks very alarming, I'm sure, to visitors in my home if they happen to peek in the locked door. But for some of our listeners, viewers out there, that's going to be, you don't have a room in your house, but you got a little wall in the basement that you've made your little area and you got your little plan. And you're down there like just working away, and it's so solitary. But then the book gets printed, and many of us who are writers, let's face it, sometimes introverts are writers and writers are introverts, whichever way you say that. But now that book's published, and you got to get it out there. It doesn't matter how wonderful it is if nobody finds out about it.
I don't know.
Yeah, it can't help people.
It can't stay a secret
Sure.
anymore.
So us somewhat introverted writers, we have to commit to this process of. And it's so hard because we don't want to feel like we're self-promoting, and it's this weird balance of, but I got to get the information out there. So if it's my personal Facebook, or if I, get some friends to help pass the word on their Facebook, whatever that process looks like, you've got to be committed to it.
If you're not willing to market your own book or article or whatever, then you can't really expect others to do what you're not willing to do yourself.
Absolutely.
And it is. I'm an introvert, so I know it's like, Lord, if you're in it, you will sell it for me. Right. But no, he's like, no, you get out there and do some work.
Yeah. Oh, I wish that were the case. People just divine that, I need to buy a new book.
They just wake up that morning and order it.
Let me Google and see if there's a book by this title. I wish it worked that way all the time. You've got to be willing to commit to, okay, I'm gonna be intentional about getting this book in front of as many people as I can so it can help people. We wrote it to help people. Now we've got to be committed to this process to get it to people so that it can help them. So there's that marketing side. I mentioned, okay, we've talked about if we submit it to PPH for PPH to consider. If I decide I want to self-publish it and I take care of all the publishing and all the decisions and everything. And then there's the case of, well, I did that, but I do still want PPH to sell that. There's an option for that as well. PPH has a new product committee that reviews self-published manuscripts to say, you self-published it, but could we sell it on a commission basis? And everybody wins in that arrangement. So there's that as well. So there are a lot of paths for books. To make sure as a writer gets this idea and you commit to that entire writing journey of an entire book, there are ways to make sure that comes to the light of day and sees a lot of people on the other side.
Because if you spend as many months, well, I may not take everybody else, but in my life, when I'm doing writing, I would love to say that it is definitely a discipline because I write all the time. But my book, it's like. And I know this sounds terrible, but I have to be in the mood to write.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if I'm not in the mood, it doesn't
time.
matter how much head knowledge I have. If I am not in the mood to write, I'm going to just stare at the screen for the time I set. I have a friend who said, I get up at 5 every morning and write for 2 hours. And I'm like, oh my word, if I got it, I'd be so angry at the world,
Oh, no.
Nobody would want to read it.
No.
But you have to find your own rhythm. You have to find your own way.
Yes.
But your own way will include these pieces.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk about writing for like an article for a magazine. Yeah. So we have Reflections magazine.
Absolutely.
And we have submissions. Sometimes we go seeking someone to write and say, look, I know you're an expert in this field. But we also have women who say, I want to write. I have this thought. And maybe they haven't really developed their process yet. And also there's other magazines that you can submit to as well. So what does that process look like?
Yeah, I think that's so important because, again, there are those who are called to do a full-length book, but I believe that all of us can write, and it's, I do this little thing at some of our writing classes where it's like, raise your hand if you believe writing is like this God-given talent, raise your hand if you believe it's this discipline that, is learned through whatever. And, it's a trick question. It's both, obviously, right? We're not supposed to ask trick questions, but I do. So I think it's so important what you brought up about the articles, because that's a great, first of all, benefit to these publications that are also going out and reaching people and helping. And it's a way as a writer
And we
to get
want
started.
to hear from people. We want to hear other voices.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So I think Reflections magazine is it's well done and just graphically just so engaging.
Thank you. We're very proud of it.
You
very
should be.
proud of it.
It's just a fantastic resource. So I encourage ladies to think about reaching out to be part of Reflections magazine. In addition to that, Pentecostal Life magazine. That's a wonderful way to share something that reaches a very broad spectrum of people. And in that case, we are as well, we very often will think of writers and say, oh, we want to do, sometimes we'll do a theme, month of February, we're going to do relationships, that's February, everybody has that theme, right? And we'll pick some writers for that theme. But we, with Pentecostal Life magazine, we're still open to a writer that shares a personal testimony, a personal experience, a devotional style article, or it's someone who's been studying a certain doctrinal topic and wants to bring some insight there. So that's a great option for sharing some ideas. And I think a good way, and we can share this with with the notes that follow the episode, but info@pentecostalpublishing.com. We can route those writers to the appropriate team that takes care of the magazines. So you're right, we should think about those options well. In fact, I'll also throw in, I mentioned earlier that my kind of start was writing Sunday school lessons.
Yeah, let's
talk about that. So we create Sunday school for every week of the year. And so right now our brand for that is called God's Word for Life. And it's every age level, from our little learners all the way to our adults.
And it's so good. Our church
thank you for
it.
sharing
I love
that.
It.
Thank you for sharing that. Well, it's certainly a lot of work to make sure we've got 7 different levels, and we've got a lesson every single week, and then here's the part for the teacher, and here's the part for the student, and it's a lot of work.
And you also have included Able Ministries in that process.
That's absolutely right. So there's a supplement to adapt the lesson for the youth, for the children's levels. So there's a lot that goes into that. And again, many times we know a certain lesson series is coming, and we'll pick writers, but we're always looking for new writers to help make sure that the material stays fresh. Because I know it's actually been a little while since I've written a lesson, and maybe what I'm about to say answers my own question. It's very tempting or easy to fall into some of the same stories and activities after you've written a little while. And so we always want to make sure we've got some new writers coming in, because they're going to bring fresh perspective, fresh games. Hey, it would be a blessing if we had we're talking about writing, so maybe we're talking about people who are writing to adults, but I want to encourage, if we've got teachers out there who say, well, I mean, I don't just sit down and write, 1,000 words on this doctrinal topic, but I love working with children. I've always wanted to write material that would help us minister to children. Great, we've got just the perfect spot for you. So same way, if we've got folks out there that say, oh, I would love to be part of writing the material.
So how would they get involved? So if I thought, I'm listening and I think, I'd love to do that, do I just call up or
absolutely
send a sample of a lesson, or what do you have to do?
What we do is we do first reach out to the person's pastor for obvious reasons. We want to make sure.
That's good to know.
We want to make sure before we just say, great, write 4 lessons. We've never heard of you, but please write 4 lessons for us. We want to start by just having a very brief conversation with the person's pastor. It's nothing to be concerned about. It's not like we're going to interrogate the pastor on your behalf. We just simply reach out to the pastor and say, hey, we've had someone from your church who'd be interested in helping us create teaching resources. Is that okay? We'd just like to be make sure you're part of that loop before we get connected and start that process. And if pastor says, absolutely, that would be wonderful, I think that'd be a great blessing, here we go, we're going to get connected. And what we do ask is that the interested writer create a first sample lesson, just so we can see what kind of
So you give them a template that
absolutely.
they use?
We say, here is an outline, and here's a template. Write us a sample lesson on this topic based on this outline, and use this template. And then we can see, like, ooh, wow, you know what? This writer really has some great, I think their strength is with, I'll pick on games for the elementary class. perfect. Now we know which editor of our team to connect them with to help them get started in
That's
that
exciting.
process.
I mean,
yeah,
I'm sure listeners are going, that fits me.
absolutely.
And that is a great starting place
Yeah.
and so beneficial.
Oh yeah, you can see the result of that in that classroom with those kiddos and with our adults, with our youth. We're really needing some youth writers. So I would love to, as a result of this podcast, if somebody says, "Oh, I'm working with youth ministry right now, and I've got all kinds of ideas."
Hopefully they're raising their hand saying, "Me, pick me."
Somebody's out there right now, pick me. So same deal. Just use info@pentecostalpublishing.com as an email to send a quick email. We are going to have someone from our editing team reach out and say, "Okay, share with us your pastor's contact info so we can take care of contacting your pastor, getting that clearance, and then we're going to send that info to write a sample lesson." From there, we know where on the team would be a good fit to get started writing, and that's a really fun way to make sure that you're getting into this writing ministry, and yet knowing that material is going to go be a blessing in churches.
Oh, and it's not just limited to, like some of the work we do, and we work so hard, and people do such amazing contributions to local churches.
Absolutely.
But if they could share that with the world, oh my goodness, what a blessing that would
Absolutely.
be. So be brave, be bold,
That's right.
put yourself out there.
Yeah.
You never know if you don't try.
That's right.
People fear rejection.
Absolutely. Sure, it's
real.
and
Feel like, well, what if I attempt it and they don't know who I am and they don't let me in?
Yeah.
That you never know if you
never
don't
know
try.
if you don't try. And I want to add a step further. Think about in your local church. We've just talked about, we're going to reach out to the pastor as a first step to make sure, everybody's communicated with and everything is in order to move forward. But that's a good time to bring up. Think about in your local church. Is there a way you can use your writing to be a blessing to the church? And I think of a couple of things. I think that many times local churches are creating things for their Facebook pages or social media pages. I don't even know all the different apps. Many churches are having these emerging media ministries where they're starting to put the services online and all that stuff. Well, somebody's got to be writing and creating all that content.
And that is a lot of content.
It's a lot of content. Think about your local church and how can I help my church by saying, hey, if you need anything written, I can help. If you need anything edited, I can help. And then I'm going to go a step further and say there are outreach possibilities that I know we haven't thought of yet. But I'll just share quick, for instance. In our local county right now, we're having this major deal where some libraries are starting to shut down. With ebooks, with audiobooks, with all of this stuff, libraries are in trouble. Right. And they're in an identity crisis where they're trying to find ways to stay viable. And so I'm seeing my local library that's trying to reinvent itself as a community center. And so they just did this remodeling project and they opened Monday, and they've turned it into tons of community classrooms and centers and all this kind of stuff. I'm going to share something that I hope is not negative after just saying, yay, share with us at PPH. We right now, maybe this will be different later down the road. Right now, we don't really have a means of publishing poetry. Mm-hmm. It's just with our audience of parents, pastors, the home, the church, we just don't have a way to get poetry out to a lot of people. Even with fiction, we're very limited. We can sell some fiction, but just to publish start to finish, maybe there will be a time if that just devastated someone. Don't give up. Don't give up. Don't give up. We can
hold on. It's coming.
We may find that we're able to find a way to make things work. Keep writing. But I'm seeing libraries that are desperate to say, who from our community can have what event, what nights. Your library, you could perhaps have start a Christian writers group for your community.
Oh, I love it.
It's both outreach to find some Christian writers in your community that come. And then, by the way, I go to this church and all this kind of stuff. It's a way for you to stay committed to your Christian writing. Maybe you have a Christian poetry reading night at your life. There are so many ways that we could maybe take advantage of the libraries in our communities.
Think outside the box.
Yeah, make it an outreach thing, but it's a way you're taking your writing ministry. And yes, we need books written, we need blogs written, we need podcasts, we need to work with social media, digital platforms. But is there something we can do through maybe the community to get beyond the walls of the church or even our digital media platform with the church and find ways to connect with people around our neighborhood?
Because it's a both and. We want to minister to the body of Christ and equip for service. But we also want to make sure that the unchurched are hearing the good news and have opportunity.
Absolutely.
to know the Lord the way we know him.
Absolutely right.
Oh, it's been so good. So in the, say, last 30 seconds, what are your last words or thoughts to those who have joined us today?
Well, I just want to encourage everyone to commit to the process. If you feel the Lord's putting something on your heart to share, don't give up on that. We've talked writing process, but now as we talk about finding the right avenue to get that resource that the Lord's directed you to create, don't give up on that process either. Just like we don't want to give up on the writing process when you're 3 months into writing and it's hard and it's just work.
When the fun has worn off.
The fun's worn out and it's work to go down to the basement and work on Tuesday and Thursday nights. Don't give up on that part of the process, but then don't give up on that publishing process either. Maybe you get a no here or there when you're starting to say, okay, maybe I'll do this, and maybe it doesn't work out. Don't give up. In the same way you don't give up on the writing process. You keep working, and the Lord directs as we prayerfully seek what's the right place for this resource. And I believe God always finds a way to bring it to where it needs to be for the right people to find it.
Well, I think for praying women who are asking the Lord to guide them, that if that desire is burning inside of them, then they can certainly equip themselves because he wants us to partner with him. He's not going to do it for us, but I think he's going to open our eyes in our community, in the local church, and however the Lord chooses to use the work that we do. I think he's going to provide the way. He's going to make it known.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, and it has been so good. And thank you to everyone who's joined us today, who's listening. So please remember to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We want you to get every single episode that's coming out. Remember that this conversation that we've been having is in print form in Reflections Magazine, and we hope that you are either the online version or the print copy that you subscribe. And check out the notes. Leanne was talking about several links, and we'll have those in the notes section for you. And if you can believe this, the next episode is really looking at the holiday season, and I can't even believe it's time for that. But we're going to be talking about how do busy women like all of us maintain our personal spiritual disciplines in the most demanding of times. And that's coming, and it's right around the corner. So we'll have some amazing guests. They'll join us in November and December, and we're going to discuss prayer and Bible study and keeping our focus on what really matters. So until then, God bless.